Welcome to The Debrief, where we talk with the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the headlines they're covering this week and where the story's going next. I'm Sarah Westwood, and I'm here today with politics editor Jim Antle. And Jim, we're just a couple of weeks away, less than that now, from the Virginia governor's race. It's a deep blue state. Biden carried it by 10 points just last year, and yet polls show it's really a dead heat in this final stretch. Why do you think it's so close?
Well, some of it's local conditions. There are some situations going on in the Northern Virginia schools. There's been a lot of talk about critical race theory, a lot of talk about transgender, a lot of talk about parental control of curricula, and some of these local issues have seemed to cut a bit against the Democrats, and Terry McAuliffe has perhaps not handled them very well. He's talked about, schools really shouldn't have to listen to parents when it comes to what to teach, and that those are comments that he's now saying were taken out of context but were not very well received. So you have those local concerns, and then you have national issues. This is the only real competitive election that's happening ahead of next year's midterm elections. It's really the first test of President Joe Biden and the Democrats. Biden is not amazingly popular in Virginia. He's not in as bad a shape as he is in some other places, but his approval rating is down. He's underwater in most recent polling. So it becomes a little bit of a referendum. Virginia has been an early referendum in previous elections when 1993 before the 94 elections. We've had what was a big indicator that Republicans were going to win. So this, in 2009, before 2010, was the last big Republican win in Virginia. So this is a situation where Biden and the national Democratic brand are a little bit on the ballot. And in a state as blue as Virginia has gotten to be, this to be competitive, we sort of, that it could potentially, depending on how things go, be a real warning sign for Democrats nationally.
You mentioned that Biden's approval ratings being underwater is a factor in the Virginia race because his agenda is on the ballot there. Do you think that his approval ratings could start to negatively affect his ability to implement his agenda in other ways, such as his ability to get this big piece of legislation over the finish line?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you have two senators, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, who have become really big obstacles. They're centrists. They don't want to go along with what liberals want in the reconciliation bill. If you're Joe Biden and you're trying to bring them along, you have to contend with the fact that you have a 37% approval rating in Arizona. You have a 19% approval rating in West Virginia. If those numbers were higher, you'd potentially have more influence with those types of lawmakers. You don't have a lot of leverage when you're significantly less popular in those states than they are. And that's going to be true in a number of swing districts that are going to be competitive next year. It's going to be true for some of the centrists in the House. And conversely, it affects how much influence he's going to have over the progressives, the left wing of the Democratic Party. These are people in safe seats. Biden is not necessarily leading from a position of real strength right now.
And finally, let's turn to someone we haven't discussed in a while, Vice President Kamala Harris. It was her birthday this past week, and the most recent thing she was in the headlines for was hiring child actors to be in a space video.
Right.
And she's really been absent from these negotiations over the big piece of legislation, despite her very recently being a member of Congress. So why do you think it is that they haven't been leaning on her in any of these big legislative fights?
I mean, she's been in the meetings, when they've had the meetings with the centrists and when they've had the meetings with the left-wing Democrats, she's generally been present. But you're right, she's not been a big part of the talks. The president himself has played a somewhat bigger role. Some on the Hill say not big enough. But even though she was a recent senator, she wasn't a long-term senator. So her relationships on the Hill are not very deep. Her connections are not very deep. And that has never seemed to be a particular skill of hers. She was a short-term legislator. Most of her previous positions were executive, prosecutorial positions. So this deal-making is new to her. She doesn't seem to have been much of an asset in that. And she's kind of weirdly positioned because she's a little bit, she's certainly to the left of the centrists, but she's not quite as far left as the Congressional Progressive Caucus. So it's not really put her very well positioned to represent either faction. But this would seem to be an opportunity for her to show her value to the administration in a big assignment like that.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for being here today. You can get more reporting from Jim and the rest of the political team at WashingtonExaminer.com.